to this because maybe I'm not listening to this right.
Hold up. Send it to me on Facebook. Let's see. Yo, you gotta watch some other shit with me. Hold on.
It turns me off. My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails, and it turns me off. But my new friend at church wore an ascot, had... My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails, and it turns me off. But my new friend at church wore an ascot, had locks, and was great in bed. Eh? I invested with him to buy farmland.
Yeah.
Then he vanished.
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah, that's my reaction, though.
Wait.
That shit fucked me up when I heard that shit.
Wait.
Like, that shit went left immediately. That shit went left immediately.
My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails, and it turns me off. But my new friend at church wore an ascot, had locks, and was great in bed. Eh? I invested with him to buy farmland. Then he vanished. How do I tell my husband I lost our money? He's ready to retire. Help.
What?
Read every word again. My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails.
Yo. What?
Yo, how did everything just...
Yo,
Yo, it's some other stuff I gotta react. Hold on, it's called, I forgot, what was it? They were called the something podcast. Let me see, bro. Oh, the Comfort podcast, yo. It's some crazy stories people be telling. Hold on, you gotta listen to it, bro.
Oh my God.
Bro, what?
My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails, and it turns me off.
Wow.
But my new friend at church wore an ascot, had locks, and was great in bed. Eh? I invested with him to buy farmland. Then he vanished. How do I tell my husband I lost our money? He's ready to retire. Help. Read every word again. My husband works in waste management, has dirty nails, and it turns me off. But my new friend at church wore an ascot. I don't know what ascot is. My new friend at church wore an ascot, had locks, and was great in bed. Hop, skip, jump. Right down. Hop, skip, jump. I invested with him to buy farmland. Then he vanished. How do I tell my husband I lost our money? He's ready to retire. Help.
Wow, okay, cool. First of all, what's his nails got to do with this? What's the poor man's nails, dirty nails got to do with this?
She was just looking for an excuse to cheat.
Diss her husband,
That's all she was looking for.
The guy from church wears an ascot, whatever that is.
Has locks.
And is great in bed.
How did we get here?
Yeah, bro!
How did we get here?
And I took all of our savings and invested in farmland with the dreadlock guy.
Mm-hmm. And his teeth, everything.
And he's taken the money and did.
It's absolutely vanished. How do I tell my husband I lost our money?
That's what you wanted. For me, because that's what you wanted. You know what I'm saying?
With our money. My money. She told, don't tell me, because I'm going to kill you.
She said,
So when you say he's greater in bed, what am I?
you ain't shit. You ain't shit, because she obviously took your retirement money to go out funky avec mon nigga.
Farmland.
Feel me?
And you disappeared with it.
Took your shit.
How do I tell my husband I lost our money?
Took your shit.
Because if your husband go take the nigga to court, it's going to come out in court that you're a fucking slut. Wow.
Oh. Bro, Jesus Christ never getting this info out of me. Like, I'm so serious, bro. Like, people don't be real, bro. What is it called?
Wow. Wow.
Oh, right here, this shit right here. Comfort Level Podcast. Bro, these stories, bro, oh my god, bro. That's just...
In my example, I asked the neighbor to move their little farm stand because people are stealing from my garden.
Yo.
Oh, I would be so mad, dude. If I spend the summer growing my freaking produce, and I have some mangy nuts and kleptomaniacs.
Let me say, hold on. It's one of the ones, bro. Nah, just one of the ones, bro. That, like, yo, I'm just sitting there listening. And, like, yo, she just some, bro. Or this dude or this girl found out her dude was cheating, or and then it was like there was one, she found out her husband was cheating with her son's girlfriend, 18-year-old girlfriend.
Wow.
Married to 20 years.
Wow.
Like, yo.
My son's girlfriend.
And they were trying to say he been grooming her and shit like that.
My son's girlfriend.
Niggas about people about.
My son's girlfriend.
Where is this, bro?
My son's girlfriend.
Mighty asshole. Let's see this. I can't find the video, but
So,
unless are they the friends lesbians?
my girlfriend's girls' night out included her friends' significant others, so I feel left out.
oh yeah, she went to go fuck.
That's
She went to go fuck. She went to go fuck because if everybody got their partner and you not there,
She went to, or she has another partner. Or they want to go do some, it's either they want to go do some orgy, threesome shit.
So,
unless are they the friends lesbians and their girlfriends came?
they're not.
Oh, damn.
So, to make a long story short, my girlfriend of nearly 3 years has always had her girls' night out every 2 to 3 weeks or so. Which is perfectly fine because I've always had nights where I did stuff with my friends as well.
The lads.
We're all in our mid to late 20s, by the way. But yesterday, while my girlfriend's friend and her boyfriend hung out at our place, the boyfriend referenced something that happened on Saturday, which was her last night out. I was confused, and after a bit of probing, found out that not only is he a regular on these night outs, but her 2 other friends bring their own boyfriends as well. It's just me who has never been asked, nor even informed that these girls' nights outs weren't the just need to be out with the girls for a bit, relaxing nights as she used to claim. Literally a few weeks ago, we talked about her upcoming night out with them, and she told me something like, sometimes I just really need to be with just the girls. Of course, I asked her once we were...
Yo, women are fucking, there's no such thing as a good woman, bro. Dog. It's like they all down.
why she never brought it up or why I had never been invited, but she just kept claiming that the guys weren't always invited and most of the time they just tagged along. Honestly, I feel pretty alone and disrespected right now. Plus, even now, almost 3 years later, I feel like I'm barely in her friend group. I feel like if they were all meeting up anyway, I could have been there and maybe have become friends with them as well. Unlike her, I do invite my girlfriend around to do stuff with my own set of friends a lot. Now it seems like it wasn't just the girls she wanted to see, but rather she just didn't want to spend this time with me, while her friends had no problem spending their time together with their boyfriends. I really don't know what to think or what to do. Okay, so relevant comments from this commenter. I think you're entitled to feel bad. She's been masking going out with her friends under girls' night. There's nothing wrong with her wanting to go out without you, but the lying part makes it weird and borderline disrespectful. I don't think this is an isolated incident.
She lying. She lying. She gonna fuck with you.
Fucking her boyfriends. They probably doing some freaky.
Because how they all having fun.
Yeah.
And why you not telling them? Why you not telling your man?
Oh man, that's crazy.
And you feel hurt because there have been other incidents, right? And then OP responded, I don't really know. I mean, everyone has their preferences and their own character. She's always been a bit more cold in the way she acts than my previous partners, but I've never thought that she'd feel like she needed this much of a break from me and the relationship as a whole. As I said in my post, I wouldn't have had an issue at all if this was just a girls' night out and if she really did need to have a bit of a break. But she was literally meeting up with her group of friends and their boyfriends. I genuinely can't imagine going out with my extended friend group twice in a row without even asking my girlfriend to be there with me. More often than not, she comes with me. So I just don't really understand why she wants to separate me from her side of her friends like that. I just don't know how to feel right now. And then there's an update 2 days later. Hey, so first of all, I just want to thank you for your comments. I couldn't reply to all of them due to the thread being locked. I read through them all, and I did what I probably should have done directly when it first happened. I went and I talked to her. To make a long story short, there were never any girls' nights out. There was always simple nights out with her friend group. So why wasn't I invited? Because they all hate my guts due to her own fault, according to her. My girlfriend said back when we first started dating, she'd always vent to them about me. All these small issues we fixed between her nights out and literally never talked about again.
I was just chilling when the boyfriend told you that. That's a fucking lie. You're a fucking slut.
I mean, they all weird. Because if y'all hate him, fuck y'all telling that nigga crib for?
Yeah, it's because it's a fucking lie. That's not true, dog. She just saying there's something. Like, women don't care what lies they tell you. Bro, my God, these bitches. Yeah, get this shit out my face. Get this shit out my face, dog.
Bro, oh my.
They think niggas so stupid, they say whatever. They think niggas so stupid, they say whatever. Fucking slut packing, boy. Oh, that dude, you just disgusted me. Thank you. Unbelievable. Fucking hate these bitches.
Hold on. Wait, oh, this shit like 2 hours. People be crazier. What went wrong with the DCEU year? I click channel. I didn't click channel. No.
Come on in. Hi, just moved in. Oh wow, your internet seems really fast. What are you on?
I'm on.
What provider are you on?
I'm on.
On what?
I'm on.
On with?
I'm on.
Who are you on?
I'm on.
Yeah, well you're on something, alright?
I'm on.
Stay always on with I'm on, your most reliable internet, with no hidden fees or data caps. The DC Extended
cinematic universe concluded roughly 2 years ago, and it was a colossal failure. With the new Superman now out in theaters, and with the entire DC universe being rebooted, it's time to look back at the old 16-film cinematic universe and look at what went wrong.
You know what went wrong with the DCEU, bro? It's because they tried to rush it, dog. They tried to rush it. They tried to be like Marvel. They tried to rush it. Their TV universe, look up the CW Arrowverse, bro. Look up the CW Arrowverse. Do your research. Yeah, the budget was shit. Writing was garbage. But, bro, they had more connectivity. They tried harder, bro. They tried harder than their bigger studios, bro. Like Warner Brothers, y'all folded, bro.
This video is not going to be me reviewing each of the movies. Instead, I'm going to go through each one and discuss how they each played a role in the collapse of this cinematic universe. Most specifically, how what went on behind the scenes played into the collapse. I'm going to divide the 10-year run of the DCEU into 3 different eras. There's the Snyder era, there's the directionless era, and then there's the lame duck era. So let's travel back in time to 2013 and look at the beginning of the DCEU. Zack Snyder began the DCEU with Man of Steel back in 2013. If you watched my previous video on Man of Steel, you would know the specific details of what went on during the production. Man of Steel was never designed to be the start of a cinematic universe. Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer thought of the movie during the production of The Dark Knight Rises, and Goyer wrote a script. The idea was, what if you put Superman in a darker and more realistic world? Along came Zack Snyder, and boom, you have Man of Steel. If you watch Iron Man, you can tell it's going to be the start of something larger. Man of Steel doesn't give off that vibe. With that being said, this wasn't an issue. At least not yet. The biggest issue would be with Zack Snyder. Man of Steel did a fine job at starting the cinematic universe. The film at best got a lukewarm reception from the general public. A lot of people loved it, but many didn't. If you have followed Zack Snyder's filmography, you would know that tends to be the case for pretty much all his movies. Snyder is such a visionary and has such a distinct style that his movies simply don't resonate with everyone. A movie like Iron Man or The Avengers connects with most audiences. Zack Snyder films have never been like that. So is it Zack Snyder's fault for putting out a divisive film, or is it Warner Brothers' fault for picking him? Regardless, the bigger issue with Man of Steel specifically, I would argue, would be Superman himself. If you look at the early MCU movies, only Iron Man is considered a great film, but the reason people still got invested into the universe was mostly because of the main characters. Those movies almost focused more on developing its main character rather than telling a good story, and this built the foundation for what would be the rest of the MCU.
And I think Captain America: The First Avenger was a great movie. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Hans, what you think? Yeah. I don't know. Like it. But yeah, I think it was a good movie. It was Cap, Iron Man, and then you had Hulk, Thor, and you know?
Invested into the universe was mostly because of the main characters. Those movies almost fault for putting out a divisive film, or is it Warner Brothers' fault for picking him? Regardless, the bigger issue with Man of Steel specifically, I would argue, would be Superman himself. If you look at the early MC...
Iron Man 2 wasn't hard? Y'all must be tripping. Iron Man 2 wasn't hard, bro? Because I remember what people were saying about Thor. But I'm not going to lie. I'd rather take old Thor back. At least we got something. That new Thor ain't it, man. That new Thor ain't it. Ain't it.
EU movies, only Iron Man is considered a great film, but the reason people still got invested into the universe was mostly because of the main characters. Those movies almost focused more on developing its main character rather than telling a good story, and this built the foundation for what would be the rest of the MCU. People overall just didn't connect with Henry Cavill's Superman. The biggest criticism of the character was how he seemingly had no problem destroying most of the city to stop Zod. While I may not agree with that point specifically, he does come across like he doesn't care. One of my biggest criticisms of the movie was the ending. Clark had just accidentally destroyed most of Metropolis, killed every last Kryptonian, and there's never a moment where he reflects on that. The movie just ends a few scenes after Zod's death, and Clark never reflects on anything that had happened. This definitely played a role in people's perception of the character. Regardless, Man of Steel scored a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 75% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.1 out of 10. The movie grossed $670 million at the box office, which by default made it the highest grossing DCEU film at the time. While the production of Man of Steel was going on, something else was going on in the superhero genre. That's right, the Avengers came out. 2012 forever changed the superhero landscape, because superhero movies were no longer about just being great films. They were about setting up a wider universe. And
my dear mercenary, are you awake?
The downside of Marvel's greatness, bro, that they low-key fucked everything up with the connected universe shit, bro.
Boy, did the executives at DC notice. As you will see, this obsession with competing and catching up with Marvel will end up derailing the entirety of the Snyder era of DC. Shortly after the release of Man of Steel, Zack Snyder was announced to be directing the sequel to Man of Steel. Not long after, in July 2013, it was revealed what the sequel would be: a Batman v Superman movie. Zack Snyder had stated from the beginning that it was always his intention to include Batman in the sequel to Man of Steel. But because of the success of the Avengers, Warner Brothers wanted BVS to not just be a sequel to Man of Steel, but to set up the Justice League, even going as far as subtitling the movie Dawn of Justice. Instead of developing multiple solo movies to the main characters of the Justice League, Warner Brothers was just going to throw them all into BVS and then make Justice League right after. This ended up being one of the biggest criticisms of the DCEU, that they were impatient and rushed a cinematic universe, especially after their first movie wasn't supposed to be a setup for said cinematic universe. Playing catch-up is not a good building block for storytelling. Regardless, production on Batman v Superman went underway. Snyder and Christopher Nolan had considered having Man of Steel share the same universe as Nolan's Batman films, but because Bruce Wayne retired at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, that means he wouldn't be in BVS. So this idea was scrapped. Snyder revealed he had a 5-movie plan for his DC story, beginning with Man of Steel, then BVS, and then a Justice League trilogy. DC would surround this mainline story with a handful of spin-off films and build their universe. So in 2014, DC was fully committed to Zack Snyder. A timeline was announced after the reveal of BVS, showing the full future of the DCEU. They were definitely going to compete with Marvel with this lineup, but Marvel wouldn't stand idly by. We can't say for certain how much of Marvel was influenced by the DCEU, but the coincidences are a bit overwhelming. Shortly after the announcement of Batman v Superman, Captain America: Civil War was announced. Shortly after the announcement of a Wonder Woman movie, Marvel announced their first female-led movie in Captain Marvel. And shortly after the announcement of Justice League 1 and 2, Marvel announced Infinity War 1 and 2. It seems like Marvel was doing their best to counter-program DC. Whether it was intentional or not, it certainly worked. On March 25th, 2016, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice would be released in theaters. It goes without saying that BVS was an unmitigated disaster for DC. The movie scored an embarrassing 28% on Rotten Tomatoes along with a 63% audience score. On IMDb, the film scored a respectable 6.4 out of 10. BVS ended up grossing $874 million at the box office. So what went wrong with BVS? Why was it such a failure even though it did pretty well at the box office? Well, a handful of things. Fans for the most part did not like these versions of the characters. The movie barely featured Superman, he only had 42 lines of dialogue. Batman represented almost nothing from the source material, he turned out to be a mass-murdering lunatic. Lex Luthor was nothing like his comic book counterpart either. To this day, he is labeled as one of the worst miscasts in comic book history. The movie also felt too cluttered trying to set up the rest.
Yeah, it just did too much, I'm not gonna lie. Jesse Eisenberg was trying to play Lex Luthor like Joker. I can see why that went wrong.
Of the Justice League. Warner Brothers trusted Zack Snyder with these characters, and Snyder didn't seem to care about the source material at all. The movie centered around arguably the three most popular superheroes ever, and audiences didn't like them. Now we can sit here and criticize the story all we want, but Warner Brothers did this movie no favors. Shortly before the release of the movie, Warner Brothers saw that BVS was going to be 3 hours. This is pretty long for a superhero movie. So Warner told Zack he needed to cut off 30 minutes of the movie. Why would they do this? Because if you have a shorter movie, that means you can screen a movie more times in theaters. That means it will make more money, right? This sentiment is laughable considering 3 of the 4 highest grossing movies of all time are over 3 hours long. But regardless, Warner Brothers interfered with Zack's movie and made him cut off a sixth of it. I'm not gonna sit here and act like the extended version of BVS is a great movie. It's not, but it is a much better movie than the theatrical version. Warner Brothers put out a botched movie because they thought it would make more money, but they ended up tanking their cinematic universe in the process. Warner Brothers panicked hard by the backlash to BVS, and this panic would actively impact their next 3 films.
No offense, but if you're paying more than $30 a month on car insurance, you're getting ripped off. Everybody knows you can buy car insurance.
The next film in the DCU would come out the same year as BVS, and that was Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad was supposed to be a darker and more serious character drama about the outcasts of the DC universe. But a few things made Warner Brothers' course correct. The first was, of course, BVS. Instead of looking at the weak script or the fact that they cut off 30 minutes from the theatrical version, Warner Brothers thought the biggest issue with the movie was the tone. People don't like serious superhero movies anymore. It seems like they almost completely forgot about the Dark Knight trilogy. Also during this time, Deadpool came out, and it was a massive hit. Newly appointed head of DC Films, Jeff Johns, told the director of Suicide Squad, David Ayer, he had to completely redo the movie into something more similar to Guardians of the Galaxy, a lighter and funnier movie. Warner Brothers completely changed what Suicide Squad was about. As a result, Suicide Squad ended up being one of the worst superhero movies ever made. Suicide Squad scored a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes along with a 58% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 5.9 out of 10. The movie would end up grossing $749 million at the box office. And considering how poorly received the movie was, this wasn't too bad. Warner Brothers heavily meddled with their last 2 films, and both ended up being pieces of shit. But the meddling wouldn't stop there. The next movie in the DCU's lineup was 2017's Wonder Woman. A lot was riding on this movie. This was going to be the first ever big-budget female-led superhero movie. Warner Brothers needed a win. They watched Patty Jenkins' movie for the first time, and they mostly liked it. But fearing the ending wasn't climactic enough or superhero movie enough, they decided to force Patty Jenkins to change the ending. Instead of it being a more thematically rich and powerful ending, they wanted there to be a big, bad Diana could fight. The climax of the movie is widely regarded as the weakest part of the movie, and unsurprisingly, the climax was the only thing Warner Brothers forced Patty Jenkins to change. However, fortune would finally strike Warner Brothers, because Wonder Woman was a massive success. Wonder Woman scored a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 83% audience score. On IMDb, the movie would score a 7.3 out of 10. The movie would end up grossing $822 million at the box office. People loved Diana. Fans wanted to see more of her, so with this massive hit, would Warner Brothers be able to capitalize on the momentum started from Wonder Woman? No. Later in 2017, Justice League was going to be released. This was what Warner Brothers had been building towards. Since the Avengers came out 5 years beforehand, Warner Brothers was finally able to catch up with their own team-up movie. How did it go? Well, I think by the end of this video, we will look back at this movie as the single biggest reason the DCEU failed. Everything about this movie would be a disaster for Warner Brothers. Production on Justice League would begin pretty much immediately after BVS would release in April of 2016. Zack Snyder would return to be directing Part 3 of his 5-movie plan. Everything seemed to be going alright in 2016. Jeff Johns, of course, had his rewrites he wanted to implement, but principal photography was completed in October of 2016, and things were looking good. At Warner Brothers, however, things were not great. The Warner Brothers execs were fed up with Snyder. Both of his DC movies were not the hits they hoped for, and the latter film was a critical disaster. Despite committing to Zack's 5-movie plan just 2 years beforehand, Warner Brothers wanted to move away from Snyder. In May of 2017, Warner Brothers finally got their excuse to move on from Snyder. Zack Snyder's daughter tragically took her own life, and as a result, he would be stepping away from the project. Instead of honoring their heartbroken director, Warner Brothers brought on Joss Whedon to completely undo everything Snyder had worked on. Warner Brothers wanted the DCU to be like the MCU so badly, they literally hired the guy who directed the Avengers to finish directing Justice League. Joss Whedon's reputation has kind of fallen in the toilet since the release of this film, and rightfully so. But Joss Whedon is a competent director. He made the first Avengers movie. If Whedon was hired from the start to make Justice League, it probably could have been an okay film. But because they brought him on to finish Zack Snyder's film, it became a disaster. Whedon and Snyder couldn't be more different when it comes to the types of films they make. Snyder is obviously a darker and more serious type of storyteller, while Whedon is a lot more upbeat and humorous. What do you get when you have a director like Whedon finish a Zack Snyder movie? Well, you get a piece of shit. Any sense of vision or authorship remaining from Zack Snyder was gone. The movie turned into a soulless, corporate piece of shit. Furthermore, the movie's reshoots under Whedon were widely mocked because of how poorly Henry Cavill's mustache was digitally removed. Despite all this mayhem, there was still a chance to save the film. Discussions were had about potentially delaying the movie because there was so much chaos behind the scenes. This would obviously be the smart thing to do, but the executives at Warner Brothers were greedy assholes. In 2017, during the movie's post-production, Warner Brothers was actually in the middle of a merger with AT&T. This would fundamentally shake up the foundation of the company, with many execs likely not having a job under the new regime. Had Warner Brothers delayed the film to early 2018 or later, there was a chance the merger would be complete and the current executives would no longer be there. This would mean said executives would miss out on their bonuses for the release of Justice League. These greedy assholes would never allow this to happen, however, so the movie would have to release in November of 2017. That's right, the reason Justice League was never delayed was because of a handful of execs wanting a few more millions of dollars. Lovely. Furthermore, the execs execs went back to their strategy with BVS and mandated Justice League be of a certain length to have more screenings. As we will eventually see, Zack Snyder's Justice League was 4 hours. Warner Brothers mandated that Justice League be under 2 hours. BVS lost a sixth of its movie due to demand from the studio. Justice League lost half of its movie. So, Justice League, the pinnacle of the DCEU, would finally release in theaters on November 17th, 2017. Justice League scored a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 67% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 6 out of 10. Justice League would end up grossing $661 million, which meant that of the 5 DCEU movies, Justice League, the team-up movie, the movie that was supposed to rival the Avengers, would be the lowest grossing movie of the franchise at the time. Justice League was an unfathomable failure. The release of this movie pretty much killed any direction or vision for this franchise. Over the next 7 years, DC would have a Justice League-sized cloud over it. So let's now look at the second era of the DCU and how it was never able to recover from Justice League.
Alright, so listen up. State Farm was trying to charge me $197 for car insurance. No thank you. I got a friend who told me about this website. Now I'm spending $58 a month. Full coverage. That's saving $139. It's amazing. All you do, you just go to the site, you put in some basic information, and you get all these options that show up. People start saving right away. All you gotta do is just go check it out. It's that simple. The link's below.
The next 4 years of DC after Justice League are what I call the directionless era. Why do I call it this? Well, because there was no direction for the franchise. Before we talk about the specifics of each of these movies, we need to talk about the fallout of Justice League. There are two aspects to discuss here: the narrative fallout and the PR fallout. Let's talk about the narrative. Whether you like it or not, the Snyder era of the DCU at least had a direction. It was all supposed to be building towards the Justice League movies. Remember that graphic I showed of the roadmap of the DCU? That was the direction. And it was all centered around Zack Snyder's vision. Because of Justice League, that vision was destroyed. There's a reason all these years later, Zack Snyder still has such a strong following. And that's because even though his films are divisive, a lot of people do love them. Maybe they didn't show up in droves like they should have for Man of Steel or BVS, but all these years later, people love those movies. Zack Snyder has a strong fan base, but with the release of Justice League, you didn't appeal to the Snyder haters because the movie wasn't good anyway, and you also alienated the people who were invested in the Snyder films. So Justice League, as a result, has no fans. Some people may enjoy the film, but no one loves Justice League. So not only did you alienate your fans, but also the narrative is now dead. After Justice League, there was nothing the cinematic universe was building towards. There's no Thanos, nothing like that. Hot take, when you have a cinematic universe, part of the appeal is that it is long-form storytelling. You think people cared to see Captain Marvel in 2019? No! They only cared because it led to Avengers Endgame. With Justice League, the DCEU lost that direction. As you'll see in a second, Aquaman was a success, but the rest of the films really weren't. The brand alone can no longer carry a movie. Since DC had no momentum, no one cared to make sure they tuned in for all the films. So that's how Justice League killed the narrative of the era. But more importantly, the movie became a PR nightmare for the studio. The first big fallout of Justice League, and this is something that not enough people talk about, is that it alienated the main talent. So Justice League featured the 6 main heroes of the Justice League. Aquaman and Wonder Woman would obviously go on to make another film with DC. Henry Cavill, aka Superman, aka the hero who began your universe, was completely turned off from DC. You think he was happy with the direction of of Justice League? No. He was also growing frustrated that a Man of Steel 2 never happened. So Justice League alienated arguably its most important actor and character, Superman. The next important hero is, of course, Batman. Supposedly, the reshoots on Justice League made Ben Affleck miserable. Yeah, he was dealing with personal hardships, but Justice League only made him even more miserable. I need to emphasize this. Ben Affleck is an Oscar-winning actor, writer, and director. He was signed on to star in and direct the next Batman movie, but he was so turned off from the brand after Justice League that he too walked away. Now, funny enough, his Batman film ended up becoming The Batman, one of the best DC films ever, but The Batman is not a part of the DCEU. Why is it not a part of the DCEU? Because the DCEU's Batman left the brand. Warner Brothers was in a situation where their Superman and Batman had very little interest in the future of their cinematic universe. Imagine how different Marvel would be if Iron Man and Captain America were done after the first Avengers movie. That would be quite the change. So DC was without Superman, without Batman, and they would also be without Cyborg. Ray Fisher famously called out DC and Joss Whedon for the abusive environment around the Justice League reshoots. He also said that the new DC president, Walter Hamada, was covering up Whedon's abuse. So Ray Fisher was subsequently blacklisted from the future of DC. No Superman, no Batman, and no Cyborg.
What am I watching here? Pure, unadulterated friendship.
The Joker was never a big part of the DCU, but because Jared Leto turned out to be a freak, he would never show up again besides one scene in the Snyder Cut. So the DCU also lost arguably their most popular villain. Now you may ask me about The Flash, because The Flash did get a movie, but keep in mind the PR nightmare that Ezra Miller is. He had allegation after allegation thrown his way. He even had to attend counseling to control his anger issues. Was he a reliable actor leading the future of DC? No, he was not. Even if the DCEU wasn't cancelled in 2023, you think Ezra Miller would have came back as the Flash? Probably not. So as we enter the directionless era of DC, only 2 of the 6 main heroes could be relied upon as faces of your franchise, Jason Momoa and Gal Gadot. And imagine if Gal Gadot got a Wonder Woman 3 that came out in, say, 2025. Given Gadot served in the IDF and is an open supporter of Israel, I'm sure her movie would have had no drama behind it. So maybe the biggest fallout of Justice League was that there was no hope for its A-list characters. That is why the rest of the DCEU after Justice League was mostly led by its B-list heroes. While the lack of a direction would plague the future of DC, it maybe wasn't the most memorable thing to come from Justice League. Because DC fans were so unhappy with Justice League, and because they could tell it resembled nothing close to what Snyder likely intended, a movement started online. This movement for years repeatedly chanted, "Release the Snyder Cut." The Snyder Cut plagued the future of the franchise, because regardless of the movies that were coming out, regardless of the Warner Brothers execs trying their best to move on from Snyder, fans just wouldn't let it go. The Snyder Cut movement honestly has to be one of the most important movements in Hollywood history. What fans were asking for was something unprecedented, to basically undo studio changes and let the original creator fulfill their vision. This movement was massive. Many of the original cast would go online to support the movement, but most importantly, the movement itself would go on to raise over $500,000 for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to honor Zack Snyder's late daughter, Autumn. The movement eventually became so big that Warner Brothers execs finally decided to have discussions with Snyder about his cut of the film. The biggest issue with the Snyder Cut at the time was that while a cut of the movie did clearly exist, a lot of VFX work needed to be done. The movie was not complete. Convincing Warner Brothers to devote tens of millions of dollars to complete a cut of a movie that already wasn't popular was a hard ask. But the stars aligned for Zack Snyder. The pandemic hit, and thus resulted the rise of streaming. Wanting to get into the game, Warner Brothers launched HBO Max, their own streaming service that housed all of DC's content. Needing something to drive subscriptions, what better piece of content than the Snyder Cut? When it was all said and done, $70 million was needed to complete the film. So did Warner Brothers think devoting $70 million for a 4-hour film was worth it? they did. On May 20th, 2020, during a fan screening of Man of Steel with Zack Snyder, he officially revealed that he would be completing the Snyder Cut. Zack Snyder's Justice League was happening. And roughly 10 months later, on March 18th, 2021, Zack Snyder's Justice League was released on HBO Max. The movie scored a 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 92% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.9 out of 10. Zack Snyder's Justice League was a huge win for the fans, but the more interesting question is, was it a win for Warner Brothers and the DCEU? I would argue it wasn't. Despite Zack Snyder's Justice League being a huge hit, Warner Brothers had no intention of restoring the Snyderverse. Zack Snyder had that 5-movie plan, and the last 2 movies would never be made. So when looking at the future of the DCEU, Zack Snyder's Justice League would never lead to anything. Many Snyder fans just became turned off from the future of DC because it wasn't the Snyderverse. So while the movie was a hit, the brand as a whole was still directionless. The DCEU was never able to recover from Justice League, despite Zack Snyder getting to complete his cut of the film. But what about the films that did come out during this time? 2018 saw the release of Aquaman, and it was an unquestionable success. The movie scored a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 72% audience score. On IMDb, the movie would score a 6.8 out of 10. Aquaman grossed $1.1 billion at the box office, which 7 years later is still the highest grossing DC film of all time. Aquaman was definitely a positive for the DCEU. People vibed with the character in Justice League, and even more so after this movie. If you told Warner Brothers in 2013 that the most profitable movie in the DCEU would be Aquaman, they would probably laugh at your face. But here we are. Aquaman would become the only DCEU film to reach $1 billion. Now I have an even more scary stat to share with you. Aquaman was the 6th film of the DCEU. Of the next 10 DCEU films, none of them would end up even grossing half of what Aquaman's total gross was. The next film, Shazam, was not a box office hit, but it was a critical success. Shazam scored a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 82% audience score. On IMDb, the film would score a 7 out of 10. Despite such great ratings, Shazam would only gross $365 million at the box office, making it the lowest grossing film of the DCEU at the time.
When I think about how I divide my time, it's very carefully. I'm Alex Diaz, I'm a professional.
Regardless of its performance, many fans resonated deeply with the character. Honestly, DC was looking alright. They had just come off their biggest success with Aquaman, and they had a new beloved character with Shazam. You would think that Warner Brothers would hop on the opportunity to capitalize off the hype, right? Well, they wouldn't. Aquaman 2 wouldn't come out for another 5 years, and Shazam 2 wouldn't come out for another 4 years. And the rest of the films in this era of the DCEU would have nothing to do with each other. The biggest problem with the directionless era of DC was that none of these films connected with each other in any way. Birds of Prey and The Suicide Squad both featured Harley Quinn, and the films aren't related to each other at all. At this point with DC, the quality of the films didn't really matter. When you don't have your A-list heroes, you are forced to make movies about Shazam or Harley Quinn or another attempt at the Suicide Squad. The C-list characters of the MCU were allowed to be successful because they were supporting the A-list characters. No one expected Ant-Man to carry the MCU. Now you could argue DC wasn't expecting Shazam to carry the DCU, but it was the only thing they got going on at the time. Birds of Prey scored a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes along with a 78% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 6.1 out of 10. The Suicide Squad scored a 90% along with an 82% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.1 out of 10. Both movies came out during COVID, so they were disasters at the box office. Now, unlike the Snyder-era films, the directionless era films were much better received. As I've just gone over, none of them were critical laughingstocks like BVS or Suicide Squad were. That is until you remember Wonder Woman 1984 exists.
God, let me tell you
this
about
movie.
This is the dumbest movie ever made, bro. Wonder Woman 2. The most idiotic, completely useless film ever, bro.
Was a disaster. It may not have destroyed the Wonder Woman character, but it certainly came close. Fans mocked and criticized this film for many reasons. Gal Gadot was mocked for her subpar acting, the effects of this film were mocked. It got so bad that people accused Diana of sexual assault, which is kind of true. The movie scored a 58% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 73% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 5.4 out of 10. The directionless era of the DCEU was largely a failure. It had its successes, and most of the movies were well received, but when you're trying to create a cinematic universe, this is not the approach you want to take. James Gunn likely looked at this era of the DCEU and knew right then and there that the entire franchise needed to be rebooted. But before that would happen, we would get one more era of the DCEU, the lame duck era. But before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 14.8% of viewers are subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you.
If you're a web designer, here are 4 Wix Studio features you gotta know. So first on the list, Section Grid. I'm talking about a revolutionary tool that lets you create your own intricate layouts, but still keeps it intuitive at every step. So you can split cells, create gaps between them, drag to resize, and swap them around. Alright, this next feature has saved me hours of work. Responsive AI. You set up your design once, and with just one click, it'll analyze the section and automatically adjust the response behaviors for each element to fit every breakpoint. Another huge time...
2022 was honestly a hilarious time for the DCEU. DC President Walter Hamada was under contract with DC until early 2023, so it was looking likely that his tenure with DC was coming to a close. But that didn't stop him from initiating his own plan for the DC universe. Hamada knew that something needed to be done with DC, so he had a long-term plan of softly rebooting the universe. The upcoming Flash film was going to be a
multiverse film, so Hamada wanted to use this movie to reboot the entire DC universe. Instead of bringing back Superman, Sasha Cal's Supergirl would be replacing him. Instead of Ben Affleck's Batman returning, he would be replaced with a 70-year-old Michael Keaton and Batgirl. And of course, the Flash would save the Flash. Eventually, this plan would culminate with the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline, a huge story in the DC canon. Starting all this while you're on your way out the door was certainly an interesting decision from Hamada, but that wasn't the only problem. The bigger and more immediate problem was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. For those of you who don't know, The Rock is someone with a massive ego, like really big. Screw Walter Hamada, he wanted to be the face of DC, him and Superman. In the press leading up to 2022's Black Adam, you can see The Rock repeatedly say that the power hierarchy of DC was going to change forever. You see, Black Adam...
Boy, I don't understand, bro. I had this nigga Rock on Facebook, bro. Oh my god, bro. Every day. The power of hierarchy in the DCEU is about to change.
Adam, the character, is supposed to just be a villain of Shazam, but The Rock didn't see it that way. Of course, because of his ego, he actually refused to star in either Shazam movie, and he demanded his own movie instead, a movie that would set him up as one of the faces of DC. As production went underway, Johnson repeatedly requested that DC bring back Superman for the end credits of his movie, but Hamada refused. Remember, Hamada wanted to replace Superman with Supergirl. Eventually, going to the execs higher up than Hamada, The Rock got what he wanted, and Cavill was in Black Adam. Cavill then proceeded to announce to the world that he was coming back as Superman, and there would be more with him to come. Black Adam was an embarrassment. The Rock had hyped up this movie and this character so much, and it turned out to be nothing more than an unintentionally hilarious attempt to take over DC. Black Adam scored a 39%, along with an 87% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think any movie in the DCU has a discrepancy as big as Black Adam. The movie also scored a 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb. Despite so much hype from Johnson, the movie bombed at the box office, bringing in only $393 million. Just 2 days before the release of Black Adam, Hamada stepped down as DC's president, partially because his own vision of DC was overthrown, but also because the Warner Brothers execs straight up canceled his Batgirl movie he had in production. Warner Brothers did this so they could save money and use the canceled film as a tax write-off. This angered Hamada, and he left DC prematurely. In his stead, DC brought on James Gunn to lead the future of the franchise. Gunn was widely known for his Guardians of the Galaxy films and his Suicide Squad film. Many were thrilled with the decision to bring him on to lead DC. In November 2022, Gunn and his producer Peter Safran officially took over DC Studios. A month later, in December, Gunn had met with all the current leads of DC and told them he was scrapping their plans. There would be no Wonder Woman 3 from Patty Jenkins, there would be no more Black Adam, and there would be no more Henry Cavill as Superman. Just 2 months after announcing he was back, Cavill announced again that he was out as Superman. In January 2023, James Gunn famously announced that he would be rebooting the entire DC universe, with new movies, a new continuity, and new...
We watching that right now, Creature Commando. See, James Gunn is actually a smart guy. You know what I'm saying? Because what you can't do in live action, you have to animate it, bro. It's just cheaper. It's gonna cost less. It's gonna be easier, simple. And he's connecting that with his live action universe as well. Yes, he's doing it all because James Gunn is smart. He's taking his time. He's actually writing things down. He's getting scripts before niggas want to throw money at movies and stuff, you know what I'm saying? He's actually caring about the product. You're
actors playing the characters. A new Superman movie without Cavill would come out in July of 2025 to kick off the DCU, as he called it.
Looking to get up to $750? Then BioLife is looking for you. Because at BioLife, you can get up to $750 in just 4 weeks. Donating to BioLife is a great way to help patients with rare and chronic diseases live more normal lives. And you get paid for your time. Each donation puts more on your reloadable debit card. so you have more money to treat yourself and treat your friends. Schedule your appointment today.
It was a long time ago. A comet bearing blood-height dark Venus fell.
Many were excited that DC was finally having a vision for its franchise. There was hope that DC could finally compete with Marvel again. There was just one issue remaining for Gunn, however, and that would be the 4 remaining DCEU films scheduled to release in 2023. That is why I call this era the lame duck era, because 4 of the 5 movies that were released during this time came out when fans already knew the DC universe was going to be rebooted. Shazam! Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom would not lead to anything. This move sparked a lot of controversy. But honestly, James Gunn was in a tough position. In hindsight, what he did was probably in the best interest for the DC brand, but it unquestionably sabotaged the 4 films left to come out. The first movie of this slate was Shazam! Fury of the Gods. You would think that the sequel to the beloved first movie would excite fans, but it didn't. Not even remotely. Remember earlier I mentioned how Aquaman and Shazam were huge wins for DC? They were, but DC took forever to put out sequels to those films. 4 years after Shazam 1, Shazam 2 came out, and any interest or hype had completely died off. Shazam! Fury of the Gods had scored a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 85% audience score. On IMDb, the film scored a 5.9 out of 10. Shazam 2 grossed a pathetic $134 million at the box office. Movies that came out during COVID did better than this movie. Up next came The Flash, and this movie was also a failure for DC. As I mentioned before, Ezra Miller was a PR nightmare. So that brought on unnecessary baggage towards the film. This film was also supposed to serve as the reboot for the rest of the DCU. That was Walter Hamada's intention, but because there would no longer be a reboot for the DCU, the ending of the film went nowhere and just decided to bring back George Clooney. The Flash scored a 63% on Rotten Tomatoes along with an 81% audience score. On IMDb, the film would score a 6.1 out of 10. The Flash would end up grossing $271 million at the box office.
So while it wasn't as bad as Shazam 2's box office, it was still a failure for DC. Up next was Blue Beetle, and this movie landed dead on arrival. There was absolutely no excitement for this movie, and as a result, no one went to see it. Despite the lack of interest from audiences, the movie did well critically. Blue Beetle scored a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 90% audience score. On IMDb, the movie would score a 5.9 out of 10. Blue Beetle would only end up grossing just $130 million at the box office, making it the lowest grossing film of the entirety of the DCEU. There was one positive to take away from this film, however. James Gunn loved the film and announced that the lead actor would return to play the character in the DCEU. So Blue Beetle wasn't a total waste. In December of 2023, the DCEU came to a lackluster end with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. How fitting that the sequel to their highest-grossing movie would be the end of their universe. Was there excitement for this movie? No, because the first Aquaman movie came out 5 years beforehand and all the hype was gone. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom scored a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes along with a 79% audience score. On IMDb, the movie would score a 5.6 out of 10. The final film of the DCEU would gross $439 million at the box office. And that's it! The DCEU officially concluded on December 22nd, 2023. What will the legacy of this cinematic universe be? I think it was an unquestionable failure. The universe failed to gain any momentum, and it was riddled with controversy. With Superman now out in theaters, we can only hope the DCU has learned from the mistakes of the DCEU. What do you think about the DCEU? Do you like most of the films? Do you hate most of the films? Let me know down.
I fuck with most of the films, though. I fuck with most of the films. But it was some complete disasters, though. I'm not gonna lie. Like, but when Man of Steel came out, I could see how BVS was bad. But when Man of Steel came out and Suicide Squad came out, I fucked with those because it was a little different to Marvel, but they was never catching up though. In 2017, Wonder Woman, fabulous. Cinema. It's like, no, but yeah, Justice League was bad.